So when we have to do an AIA job, we'll start just like any other job in our contract jobs module. And I'm going to go ahead and just add a new contract. We'll go through this as if we're bidding on the project. I'm just going to choose one of my classic clients that I have set up here, and I'll call this my AIA webinar job. Now, one very important thing to note is that you'll need GCBID for AIA invoicing. If you don't have this enabled, it's something that you can enable in your own account. It doesn't need to be done by our customer support team. And just before I even create this job, so you can see where you do that, it's in this Customize section under AIA invoicing. You just flip the switch and you'll have GCBID as an option whenever you're creating a job. So I'm going to go ahead, add a new contract job. Ooh, I'm freezing up a little bit. Not my usual computer. Sorry for the delay, guys. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to add my AIA job here. I'm going to choose GCBID so we can make sure that Knowify knows to set up the AIA invoicing. And for this example, I'm going to use simple mode. We won't really need to go through all of the advanced and professional features. We can cover that in other webinars. But I really just want to focus on the contract management and invoicing. So we're going to go with simple mode for this one since it's the easiest style to job cost. And we don't need to do things like set job addresses and stuff. So I'm just going to run through this really quick. And it's going to pull me into my create bid screen. So this is where I'm going to be putting together the bid that I'm sending out to my client. I can put in their name here. I'm sending this to Vin. And then I can also input the request for proposal number if I got one from my GC. Just plug it in here. We can let them know when we expect to get started. I'll be ready on Monday to get started on this project. And now what I'm doing is putting together my quote that I'm sending to the client. Now, we have a couple different ways we could do this. Obviously, if I had used professional mode, I could pull in my estimated cost and mark it up to quote to the client. But we can always manually write in items. I can put in a whole schedule of values and break down the bid lines into a variety of different phases. That'll just be as simple as saying, demolition, $1,000, add another line, rough-in, $2,000. We actually have a way you can automate this a little bit more just to speed up the process. In our experience, a lot of the people who do AIA invoicing actually have their schedule of values laid out in an Excel spreadsheet. So you actually have the ability to pull up this Excel spreadsheet and say, these are our bid pricing, and I'll copy that. And then I can say, copy from spreadsheet, paste them in here. And it'll actually create a list of line items for me, just so I don't have to worry about manually writing in all this info, especially if I already have it from another source. It'll just save me a lot of time. This way, it'll just make a $35,000 contract. I can always add additional lines. We'll put in your terms and conditions, and we save these across all of your AIA contracts. You don't have to worry about rebuilding them every time. We'll just keep them here. And then, just for the sake of the bidding process, it'll create the document, and you can send this out directly to the client. That being said, if you want to bid it as a lump sum, I'm just going to show you something else as an option. Let me delete these lines. And maybe I'll just say, contract sum $35,000. We'll still be able to adjust this later on before we start invoicing. And then I'll be able to invoice along my schedule value so it shows correctly on the AIA. But when I'm doing the proposal, I can do the simple $35,000. Obviously, we have the ability to send it out for an e-signature, but in this situation, I'm just going to fast forward to the point where the client has signed off, we won the bid, and now this project is active. Now, once the project's active, you'll see this little notification in your contract and change orders. Right now it's active. I can switch it to a draft if I haven't invoiced anything yet. And now before I start any of my actual invoicing, it's always going to prompt me for a little bit more information, like my GC's contract number, the contract date, and then this is where I'm going to plug in my retainage values. And so now, whenever I submit one of my AIA invoices, it knows to pull a 10% value from all completed work and stored materials, and it's going to automatically take that out from what my payment I'm requesting from the client is. And like I said before I switch this to active, we can bid it as a flat 35,000. But if I have my SOV lines, like I showed you earlier, I can take these and say, I'm going to actually edit my schedule values. I'll hit this little lightning bolt. And now I can drop these in because I haven't started invoicing yet. I'll delete my contract sum. And it has the SOV lines that I can invoice along. And just for the sake of getting some more information on, what I originally bid out versus what I have now, this is just showing me that these match up. So it's not like I'm going to end up over or under invoicing the client. I know that I'm staying along the terms that we initially had quoted to the client. So that's just how we put together some of these items. And now I'll just go through the process of submitting our first invoice. When I hit this Invoice Now button, you'll see that the invoice screen is slightly different than our classic invoicing process in Knowify. It'll prompt me for the last date of the billing period. So let's say I'm going to invoice for everything we've done through February 15th. What it's going to prompt me for is the percentage of work that I've completed on each of these lines, as well as the amount of materials that I have purchased at this point in time, my stored materials. One thing I'd like to clarify, since this is always something that's always a little bit confusing, the stored materials aren't really meant to be, this is the amount I'm invoicing for labor, this is how much I'm invoicing for materials. This is more of a deposit that you're going to end up transferring over to your completed work as you work through this. It's just a way for you to invoice the client or the GC for the materials that you're going to have to purchase, so that way you can kind of afford to have, all of these materials on hand before you start the project. And then that way, as you work through, you can invoice the remaining scheduled value of this. But again, we're going to be moving the value from stored materials to completed work, and that's always important to note. The default setting we use is a percentage of completion. This is a very classic AIA process. But we do give you the option to do a dollar figure instead. So if you have, fixed sums that you like to use for your completed work instead of percentages, that's always an option as well. And then we also give you the option to just write in lump sum dollar values. It's just a way that you can come in and kind of simplify the process. So instead of doing classic progress invoicing, you can just say $1,000. It won't do anything with stored materials. So if you are doing a lot of really in-depth AIA invoicing and you need the stored materials, we don't really recommend you to use this. And then once you do use it once, we're going to have to lock you in on this style, because otherwise it'll make a whole bunch of discrepancies in your future AIA recs, and we don't want you to have to mess all these documents up. And so I'll come in here and say I want to invoice. I've completed, let's say, 50% of my site prep, and I have $2,000 of materials on hand. When I click Show Output, it's going to give me the basic breakdown of what's going to be on the first page of my AIA document. This is kind of your G702. It's just showing you a live updating preview of what's going to be on it. So if I came in and make an adjustment, like maybe I was invoicing 75%, you'll see these numbers automatically update just to give me some more info. And if I want to see the document, before I actually finalize this, I can click Preview PDF. It'll just bring up a quick preview window. I'm going to download it just so I can show you this in full size. And it's generating this classic G702-esque document. It's not the actual official one, but if you guys are actually purchasing the AIA docs, then we can set up your documents in Knowify to print onto those fields. We can also do a lot of other types of customization around this. Like if you want to leave room for a notary stamp, we can do that. We can set it so it always has the same signature and it's not based off of what users in the system. We do a lot of classic stuff like this just to make the whole process a little bit smoother and easier, make you, not have to do quite as much work. And then I can see my continuation sheet with my schedule values is automatically pulled in onto the second page, and it's based off of those lines that I had copied and pasted from the spreadsheet. So this is just my way of not having to manually write in all of this info. Knowify is really taking care of a lot of the time-consuming part of this process for us. So I'll verify this invoice. This is where it would send to my QuickBooks account. And we'll also push a journal entry for the retainage. And so it's just giving me a quick summary. And of course, I can always email it right to the client. We can attach additional images here. If you have people taking photos in the field, they'll automatically be uploaded here. So all I have to do is give them the OK, and they'll send it along with the invoice. I can see the summary page again here. If I ever need to edit it, I can always do this. Things are always a little weird when you edit in Knowify, but it's always an option if you need to. And then when I've received payment from the client, I just click Record Payment. If I'm recording a partial payment, this is where I'll write in the new value. But I'll just record a complete payment on this. And it'll close out this invoice. That's just some of the basics as far as AIA invoicing goes. But I'm going to show you a couple other neat tricks here. I'm going to come back to my contract. First of all, it's going to show me how much I've invoiced, 70% of line 1 and everything else hasn't been invoiced. But now I'll get into some change order management, which is always a huge part of any AIA job. So I'll start with something simple, like a normal change order. I could say, additional supplies to replace broken ones. And I can write in, whatever my value is. And you see that we have a internal CO number and then a GC reference number. The internal CO number is how it's going to be managed in Knowify. So if I add another change order before this one's finalized, you'll see that it's still using CO number 1. So if I said, labor to install replacement parts, 2,000, it knows to affiliate these with one change order, even though it's multiple lines. And so when I save it as a draft and I preview this change order, it's actually going to pull in 2 lines, even though it's still CO number 1. This means that on my AIA doc, it's still going to be treated as if it's 2 separate lines. But that's what our GC reference number is for. If they're going to send, if they're going to send me, one number to use for my change orders, and that's how they want it referenced on the AIA doc, that's fine. We could say, yeah, they're calling this their internal reference for the 43, and I'll do it for this line too. And now when I make this active and I'm invoicing, it's no longer going to be referenced as, CO number 1 or with these names. It's going to be for the GC's reference in the AIA number 43. This will also apply for anything with a different CO number internally for me. So I could say, my other change order for 2,000. If I call this one 43 too, it's still going to be pulled in as one line when we're doing our final invoicing. So I'll come up here, I'll say invoice now, put in the last day of the billing period. Let's say it's through the end of February. Now internally, again, these are all going to be separate lines, but you see that it has the GC reference number laid out here. So let's say I want to invoice some of these. I want to go 100% complete with this, $2,000 in materials on this line, and 50% complete with this. It actually knows to compile these into one change order line on this reference. And it treats it all the same, so we don't have to worry about, making sure that our internal identification of this change order matches what we have for the GC. We can still see it as separate lines, separate change orders, all on our end, but the invoice documents can always be correct. And so now I'll just finalize this invoice just to kind of move along with it a little bit more. And just real quick as a side note, since I had that send to QuickBooks option here, we do send these invoices to your QuickBooks account as well as the retainage. And you can set a default account for where you want the retainage journal entry to go. So if you have an other current asset or other current liability account that you need to push this to, I think it's other current asset if I'm not mistaken, then that's how it's going to be mapped. You know, you come into your QuickBooks feed, you go to job defaults, and you can set it to whatever you need it to be. So at this point, we can see how much has been invoiced. You know, we can see all this information. But the next thing I want to cover is just how you invoice the retainage on a project. Because I know that I'm holding 10% retainage on this, and you know, it's being kept off of every invoice automatically, huge help. But now let's say I'm done with the project. I'm going to invoice for everything through the 1st of March. I'll also just kind of show you this on how the stored materials is going to work. You know, if I try to invoice 100% of site prep as well as the $2,000 in materials, you'll see that Knowify is automatically going to stop me because this would be a situation where I'm overbilling. You know, it's going to think that I'm trying to invoice $1,200 or sorry, $12,000 on a $10,000 item. So it wants me to adjust this to 0, and now I can invoice that complete line with no errors. And so let's say we're invoicing this entire contract. Again, I'll have to remove the materials from this and put it in 100% here. And you'll see the second I switch this last line to 100%, this little box pops up that says invoice retainage separately. This means that when I invoice this last AIA rec, it's not actually going to include retainage yet. So if I see my output, I can see that there's still values being retained by the GC. If I uncheck this, it's going to include those in the current payment due, and it's going to be removing the retainage from my retainage account. But let's say I want to invoice these separately. When I verify and finalize, it's going to show me the amount that's being retained in this period. That's fine. And now this job is technically 100% billed. So when I come back to this project, I can see $40,000, the full contract value, it's been invoiced. But obviously, I still need to invoice my client for the retainage, and so that's why this button now reads Invoice Retainage Now. If I click here, it knows that it no longer needs to do AIA documents, and it's going to put together our standard Knowify invoice, and it's going to just be pulling in the value that's been retained from every line that I've invoiced so far, and just kind of show you what it's going to look like. It's going to be whatever your standard setup is right now for your Knowify invoice. I can see the different retainage lines, you know, the names of the SOV, the final values, and this is just what our retainage invoices are going to look like. That being said, we do often hear requests for people who want to use the AIA rec even though they are invoicing retainage, and we actually have a way that you can do that as well. So if I still need to see that same SOV layout, but I want to invoice all of my retainage, I can come in here and I can adjust what my retainage values are. Like if I want to adjust these, well, let's say I want to invoice all of it, I'll invoice 0%. That being said, you can always adjust these values mid-project and invoice for retainage kind of as a halfway point. A lot of times, you know, we'll see that people need to switch to 5% retainage when they're about 50% complete with the project. That'll allow you to invoice what, you know, half of what's been retained so far, and moving forward, it'll only hold 5% on every line. So you won't have to do any kind of manual stuff like that. It'll automatically set it up for you. And now when I invoice, you'll see that I'm back to this classic AIA screen, not the standard Knowify. And when I verify and finalize, you'll see it's taking out of my retainage account. That's why it's coming in as negative. It's setting up a $4,000 invoice, and it's going to be setting it up in the AIA format instead of in my standard Knowify layout. When I verify and finalize, same idea. It'll send it to QuickBooks, and it'll close out this job for me. So when I come and check out how this has been going, I can see it's been 100% invoiced, and we're all good on this job. Now that's just the basics of kind of what I wanted to cover. I'll get to everyone's questions in a second if there's anything in there. But just one last thing I wanted to show you guys, which is a neat trick for all of Knowify, kind of aside from AIA, but it's always really useful when you're trying to, track what's been invoiced so far, what's been happening in your SOV lines, your past pay applications. This activity feed that you see in the top right corner of any contract job is going to show you a list of every material that's been allocated to the job, all your subcontractor bills. You can turn on labor if you want to see time entries. But this is great when it comes to AIA invoicing and progress billing because you can see the kind of history of what's been invoiced so far. It also shows what's been paid. So I can see, this invoice, application 1 is already paid out. I can see here's the invoice payment, same value. And so this way, if something doesn't look quite right in application 4, I'll say, well, let's see what happened in application 3. It's just a way for me to get a quick view of everything that I've submitted in the past and make sure that all of my recs are going to be correct moving forward. Kind of the nature of progress billing makes it that everything for an invoice to come out correct, obviously everything preceding it needs to be correct as well. And so that activity feed is just a great way to kind of jump in, get a quick view of everything that's been invoiced so far, all of the different lines, their values, and just how we've been going about this job up to this point in time.